The message did not come from a powerful country or a famous organization. It came from a small, forgotten region that most people in the world had never heard of. It was a place missing from the news, missing from maps on television, and missing from the minds of leaders who made big decisions. For years, life there had been hard, but people survived quietly. Then everything collapsed at once. First came the drought. The rains that once arrived on time stopped coming. Crops dried up in the fields before harvest. Wells turned into pits of cracked mud. Families walked for hours just to find a small amount of dirty water. Animals died, and when animals died, people lost their only source of food and income. Parents began skipping meals so their children could eat. Soon, even that was no longer possible. As the weeks passed, sickness followed hunger. Children grew weak. Old people stopped getting up in the morning. Small injuries turned deadly because there were no medicines. The local clinic shut down when doctors fled, afraid they would not survive. Rumors spread faster than help ever had. Some said the world had abandoned them. Others said no one was coming because the place was cursed. Then violence began. When food is rare, fear grows quickly. Groups fought over remaining supplies. Roads became unsafe. Aid trucks that once came stopped coming. Armed men controlled paths and demanded payment people did not have. At night, entire villages went silent, afraid even to light fires that might draw attention. Local leaders met in a small concrete building with no electricity. They sat around a table covered in old maps and broken radios. Everyone there knew the truth. If help did not come soon, thousands would die, maybe more. They had delayed asking the world for help for too long, hoping things would improve. Now there was no more time. With failing communication, equipment, and borrowed power, they sent a message out. It was simple and desperate. They explained the situation as clearly as they could. Hunger, disease, violence, no safe routes, no functioning hospitals. They did not promise success. They only asked for help. The message went out to governments, aid agencies, humanitarian groups, and international organizations. It reached offices and clean buildings where people sat behind desks and read reports every day. At first, no one reacted strongly. Disasters happened all the time. There were always emergencies somewhere. Experts reviewed the details and sighed. The region was too unstable, too remote, too dangerous. Sending help would cost too much and risk too many lives. Meetings ended with the same conclusion. The situation was tragic, but intervention was not realistic. Some organizations sent small donations of food drops that never reached the people who needed them. Others sent words of concern and promises to monitor the situation. Unofficially, many called it a lost cause. A few analysts wrote short notes using cold language. Low probability of mission survival. High casualty risk. No infrastructure to support deployment. In private conversations, they used another phrase. They called it a death zone. Days passed, then weeks. Inside the region, things grew worse. Outside it, the message slowly disappeared under newer headlines. It looked like the world had already moved on. But the message did not vanish completely. It reached people who did not sit behind desks. Somewhere far away, an emergency responder read it late at night. He had worked in earthquake zones, where buildings crushed entire families in seconds. He had pulled people from rubble while aftershocks shook the ground beneath him. He had watched cities collapse and still found survivors. When he read the message, his expression did not change much. He had seen worse. In another country, a trauma doctor saw the same report. She had treated victims of war and outbreaks that emptied cities. She knew what it meant when clinics closed and sickness spread unchecked. She did not think about danger first. She thought about time, how fast people could die without help. A former search and rescue leader saw the images attached to the report. Dry land, armed checkpoints, starving children. He remembered places others said were impossible to enter. Places where missions were cancelled until people like him went anyway. These individuals did not know each other well, but they shared something important. They had spent their lives working where survival was never guaranteed. They were not fearless. They were familiar with fear. They respected it, but they did not let it decide for them. Quiet conversations began. Phone calls were made. Messages sent. They asked the same questions again and again. How bad is it, really? How many people are still alive? Is there any way in? What would it take to stay? The answers were not comforting. Supplies would have to be carried in by dangerous routes. Evacuation might be impossible. Protection would be limited. Communication could fail completely. People warned them not to get involved. Some called them reckless. Others said they were chasing hero stories. They listened. Then they kept planning. Word spread slowly through small networks of disaster workers and medical responders. Not through social media, but through trust. People who had worked together before in places where others had quit. Each person who agreed to help knew the risks. None of them believed they were invincible. They just believed that someone had to answer the call. No public announcement was made. No press conference. No dramatic speeches. Planning happened quietly. Equipment lists were written. Vaccinations updated. Old contact numbers were pulled out. Backup plans were created. Then backup plans for those plans. To the outside world, it looked like nothing was happening. Inside the region, people waited. Parents held sick children through the night, listening to breaths that grew weaker. Elderly men sat outside their homes, staring at the horizon, remembering a time when life was easier. Children asked questions no one could answer. When will food come? When will the doctors come? Many had stopped believing the answers. Then one morning, distant sounds broke the silence. Not gunfire, not shouting, the low, steady sound of engines moving slowly, carefully. People did not celebrate yet. They had learned not to hope too quickly. But somewhere on those dangerous roads, moving toward a place the world had already given up on, help was finally coming. When news quietly spread that a small group was planning to enter the region, the reaction from the outside world was almost the same everywhere. People said it was a mistake. Voices from government offices, international agencies, and even experienced aid workers warned them not to go. They said the danger was too high and the chances of success were too low. According to every official report, the area was unstable beyond control, and anyone stepping inside would likely not come back. Advisories were sent out, written in serious language. They listed threats one by one. Armed groups controlled the roads. There was no reliable food supply. Diseases were spreading fast. Communication towers did not work. Medical evacuation was nearly impossible. Even the weather was against them. These were not guesses. These were facts. The warnings were clear. Entering the region would be reckless. Some officials tried to stop them politely. Others were more direct. They said responsibility would not be taken if something went wrong. Insurance would not cover such missions. Support could not be guaranteed. In meetings, people shook their heads and quietly said the same thing again and again. This is not survivable. The region earned its nickname in private discussions, a death zone, not because people died there quickly, but because they died slowly, cut off from help, crushed by hunger, illness, and fear. Analysts believed the environment itself would defeat any rescue mission. There was no system left to work with, no structure to depend on. It was chaos layered on top of desperation. Those planning to go did not argue emotionally. They listened carefully. They studied every warning, every red mark on every report. They knew the risks were real. Many of them had scars, both visible and hidden, from past missions where things had gone wrong. They were not blind to danger, but what others called impossible, they called familiar. They had worked in places where roads vanished overnight, where hospitals were bombed, where diseases spread faster than news. They had learned how systems fail and what humans do when everything collapses. To them, the danger signs did not mean do not go. They meant prepare better. While others talked about cancellation, this group focused on planning. They stopped thinking like organizations and started thinking like survivors. If there were no roads, they would create temporary paths. If there were no hospitals, they would build mobile ones. If communication failed, they would rely on signals, schedules, and discipline. Preparation became intense. Every item was questioned. Do we need this? Can we survive without that? What happens if this fails? Medical supplies were packed carefully, knowing there would be no replacements. Water purification systems were tested again and again. Equipment was chosen not for comfort, but for reliability under extreme conditions. They planned for injuries among their own team. They planned for delays. They planned for betrayal. They planned for moments when fear would tell them to turn back. Each plan had another plan behind it. They were not confident. They were cautious. Some tried to shame them into stopping. Critics said they were trying to play heroes. Others accused them of wasting resources that could be used in safer places. Articles were written questioning their judgment. Online discussions called them foolish. They did not respond. People close to them worried in a more personal way. Families asked hard questions. Parents asked if this mission was worth their child's life. Friends asked why someone would choose danger when it could be avoided. These questions hurt more than official warnings. The answers were simple, even if the situation was not. They said they had seen what happens when no one shows up. They had seen villages fade away because help came too late or not at all. They knew that if everyone waited for safety, help would never arrive. As departure grew closer, preparation turned quiet and focused. Each person understood their role clearly. There was no room for ego. No one was more important than anyone else. They checked each other's equipment and reminded each other to rest. Small routines mattered. Discipline mattered. The night before leaving, some slept poorly. Others slept deeply, the way people do when their minds accept what is coming. There were no speeches, just nods and brief words. Everyone knew what they were stepping into. At the same time, reports continued to come from the region. They grew shorter, more desperate. Numbers of dead increased. Though no one knew the real count, the entire area stopped responding. The silence itself became a warning to the outside world. The decision still made no sense. Why walk into a place everyone else was running from? Why accept risk when the outcome was uncertain? From a distance it looked like madness, but those preparing the mission knew something others did not fully understand. Humans from harsh environments develop a different relationship with risk. People who have survived extreme conditions do not expect safety. They expect struggle. They know fear will be present, so they do not wait for it to disappear before acting. By the time the final checks were done, there was no excitement left, only readiness. They were not chasing glory. They were responding to a call that others chose to ignore. When the transport finally moved, it did so quietly. No flags, no public attention, just a steady movement toward danger. Officials watching from afar believed they were witnessing the beginning of a tragedy. What they did not realize was that for these responders, this was not the start of disaster. It was the start of doing what they had trained for their entire lives. The first step into the region felt heavy, as if the land itself was pushing back. The vehicles moved slowly, not because of broken engines, but because everyone inside was watching closely. Burned buildings stood like empty shells on both sides of the road. The ground was dry and cracked, and the air carried a smell of dust mixed with smoke. This was worse than the reports had said. Much worse that there were no clear signs to welcome them. No officials, no markers, no organized checkpoints, only silence, broken now and then by distant movement. People watched from behind ruined walls, unsure whether to run or to hide. Fear lived openly here. It had nowhere to go. Their first communication attempt failed. Radios crackled and died. Satellite equipment struggled to lock onto a signal. For a moment, the team realized how alone they truly were. If something went wrong now, no one outside would know immediately. This was the point where many missions would turn back. They did not. Within the first hour, they met the first armed men. Not soldiers, not police, just young faces holding old weapons. The tension was sharp. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, could end everything. The team leader stepped forward slowly, hands visible, voice calm. He spoke simply. They were there to help the sick and the children. They carried no weapons. The moment stretched. Eyes searched, faces. Finally, the armed men stepped aside. No smiles, no promises, just a warning gesture toward the road ahead. The team moved on. Soon, they saw the true cost of abandonment. Villages where time seemed frozen in suffering. Children with empty, serious eyes. Mothers too tired to cry. The sick lying on thin mats, waiting without hope because hoping took too much energy. Many did not trust the newcomers. Too many had promised help before and disappeared. The team did not argue. They set up quietly, using little more than tarps, batteries, and discipline. They built a small treatment area near a well that still produced water. Well, water was unsafe, but they treated it. People watched from a distance as machines purred and filters ran. Slowly, curiosity replaced fear. The first patient was a child with a fever so high he barely responded. The doctor worked with focus, not words. When the child breathed easier hours later, a small whisper moved through the crowd. They stayed through the night. No one left. News spread faster than expected. In places with no internet, stories still travel. People walked for hours to reach the camp. Some arrived carrying the wounded on doors or blankets. Others came just to see if the rumors were true. Some only watched. As the number of people grew, so did the danger. Armed groups circled, uncertain and uneasy. The team treated anyone who came, without asking questions, without choosing sides. That neutrality saved lives. Fighters with injuries sat next to children with infections. Pain made them equal. Sleep disappeared. Work took over. Every hour mattered. When supplies ran low, they adapted. When tools broke, they fixed them with whatever was available. When plans failed, new ones replaced them instantly. Experience guided every movement. One night, gunfire sounded close, very close. The team did not panic. They pulled patients to safer positions and waited. Shots faded into the dark. Morning came. Work continued. People noticed this. The newcomers stayed when fear tried to push them away. Slowly, local volunteers stepped forward. At first, they just watched. Then they helped carry water. Then they learned basic treatment steps. Training happened naturally, quietly. Knowledge was shared without lectures. Someone gave the team a name. A local word turned into a phrase, then into a shared meaning. Deathworlders. People who lived where life was hardest and survived anyway. It was not meant as an insult. It was respect mixed with disbelief. The team did not correct it. Days turned into weeks. The camp grew. More lives were saved than anyone could count. The outside world still knew little. Inside the region, everything had changed. Help had not just arrived, it had stayed. After the first weeks, something unusual began to happen. The place that once felt frozen in fear started to move again. People were still suffering, and danger had not disappeared. But there was now a sense of direction. When the team arrived, the land felt like it was dying. Now, it felt like it was breathing, slowly and painfully, but breathing again. The treatment area was no longer just a spot under tops. It became a center people depended on. Lines formed every morning before sunrise. Some came for medicine, some for clean water, and others simply for a place where no one was fighting. Even armed men respected that space. It was understood without being announced that violence would not cross into it. This alone was a powerful change. The team noticed something important. The biggest problem was not only sickness or hunger, it was fear. Fear had shaped every decision people made. Parents were afraid to travel. Doctors had fled because no one protected them. Teachers had stopped teaching. When fear ruled, nothing functioned. So the team focused on stability. They trained local volunteers every day, not in classrooms, but by doing how to clean wounds, how to spot early signs of infection, how to safely distribute food without causing chaos. These lessons spread quickly. A woman trained in the camp taught 5 more in her village. A young man shown how to treat dehydration became the most trusted helper in his area. Power slowly shifted back to the people. Violence around the camp began to drop. Armed groups realized that attacking near the area would turn everyone against them. Sick fighters needed treatment too, and they knew it. A wounded man could choose revenge or healing. More and more chose healing. The team also began difficult conversations with local leaders. There were deep disagreements and old resentments. Trust had been broken many times before. The team did not take control. They listened. They helped leaders talk to each other without weapons nearby. Some meetings failed, some succeeded. That was enough. Children returned to the camp just to sit and watch. Someone found old notebooks. Someone else found pencils. Learning restarted not because a school existed, but because hope made space for it. As conditions improved, outside observers finally started paying attention. Satellite images showed activity where there had been none. Reports from traders mentioned safer routes. Journalists requested access. Analysts expressed surprise. The same place labeled unsalvageable was now functioning at a basic level, but the team knew something the reports did not show. None of this was permanent yet. They pushed harder, not with force, but with structure. Water systems were expanded. Simple shelters were reinforced. Supply paths were mapped and shared with trusted locals. Redundancy was built into everything because collapse was always possible. Exhaustion became constant. The team worked through illness and injury. They argued sometimes, quietly, away from civilians. They disagreed over timing and risk, but when the work needed doing, they moved as one. One day came when a major armed group approached openly. The tension returned. This was a test. The team leader stood outside the camp and listened. The group wanted recognition and access to treatment. The answer was calm and clear. Everyone is treated. No one controls this place. They accepted. From that moment, the camp was no longer just aid. It was neutral ground, a rare thing in a broken land. The world outside began preparing praise, studies, and debates. Should these responders receive awards? Was this a model mission? Was it repeatable? Those questions felt far away from the dirt and fatigue on the ground. The team began preparing to leave, slowly, carefully, not because the work was finished, but because leaving the right way mattered. They did not want dependence. They wanted strength. Local leaders took over supply control. Trained workers ran clinics. Volunteers taught volunteers. Systems held, even when the team stepped back. When the time came to reduce their presence, there was no celebration, just quiet gratitude. What had changed was not that danger disappeared. What changed was that fear no longer owned everything. The land still struggled, but it stood. Months after the team first arrived, the region no longer felt like a place forgotten by the world. It was still poor. It was still fragile, but it was alive. Markets slowly reopened. People traveled again, carefully, but without the same fear that once controlled every step. Children laughed more often than they cried. These were small signs, but in a place that had been close to collapse, they meant everything. The team did not call it success. They measured progress differently. Fewer emergency cases each day. Fewer people arriving too late. More locals handling problems before they became deadly. These were numbers that mattered more than headlines. When international media finally arrived, they expected dramatic stories of rescue and heroism. Instead, they found people working quietly. Doctors teaching local workers. Volunteers fixing water pipes. Community leaders discussing food distribution plans rather than fighting over power. It confused many reporters. There was no single moment to film. No clear ending. Some journalists asked why the team stayed so long when others would have left earlier. The answers were simple. Leaving too soon would have broken everything. Staying too long would have done the same. Knowing the difference came from experience. Analysts at desks far away began writing reports. They admitted that their early predictions had been wrong. The region had been labeled hopeless, yet it survived. The reason was not advanced technology or massive funding. It was people who knew how to operate in chaos. Behind closed doors, officials debated whether similar teams should be used elsewhere. Could this approach work again? Could it be scaled? Those debates missed one important thing. The team never saw themselves as special. They did not think of the place as more dangerous than others had been before. They simply adapted. When medals were discussed, the team refused attention. Recognition did not save lives. Training did. Preparation did. Discipline did. They accepted thanks from locals, quietly, because that was the only gratitude that mattered. One by one, the responders began to leave. Not all at once, not dramatically. They checked systems before each departure. Who takes over this role? Who fixes this if it breaks? Who teaches the next person? Only when the answers were clear did someone go. The final day did not feel like an ending. There were no speeches. The vehicles were packed. Equipment that could help stayed behind. Local workers walked alongside them part of the way, then stopped. Hands were shaken. Eyes met. Words were simple. The team did not look back for long. They had learned long ago that staring at what was left behind made moving forward harder. The story they left behind, however, traveled far. People in the region told it their own way. They said help came when everyone believed it would not. They said these people walked into danger without asking for control. They said they stayed when fear tried to push them out. They did not say the team saved them. They said the team stood with them long enough for them to stand again on their own. In other parts of the world, crises continued. Floods, wars, outbreaks, and quietly, some of the same people answered new calls. Not because they sought danger, but because they understood it. Among those who watched from afar, a lesson remained. The harshest environments do not always break humans. Sometimes, they shape them into people who can survive where others cannot. And when the world is at its worst, those are the ones who answer the call.